We needed more lighting. We needed more lighting. Welcome in, everyone. I forgot to turn the top light on. Felt a little shadowy in here. Kevin McPherson, it's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's been a little over 24 hours, I think, since we've done one of these. We've hit some, where we've had two in a day. Nothing really earth-shattering yesterday. We knew Malik Ewin was coming. I say that. The earth shattered a little bit, but we came on and talked about that. Since then, and we'll revisit that in a little bit, but since that time, nothing really earth-shattering. We knew and we reported and had already confirmed that Malik Euan was set to visit. His visit began about midday yesterday. I've got some source information, in-visit source information. Let's go, Kevin. All right, I like that. Yeah, let's get the positive vibes going. This one's playing out just like we told you it probably would. The process that Calipari had in his first. You are the truth, Kevin. Okay, thank you. You have known something. You've known the truth all along the process. I'm just reading the first three comments here. I'm not skipping any. Okay, so let's get through some of the truth today the way I see it. I appreciate that. Some compliments coming in here. Thank you. So let's talk about Malik Euan in this visit. It's laying out like I always thought it would. Remember, we said he went in the portal around the time, just a few days before we heard Arkansas was the main player here, and it was likely, a silent commitment. Then we confirmed the paperwork had been done for his enrollment, his admissions, just like the processes before. And I always say, if Calipari keeps it consistent to what he did last year, there'll be an on-campus visit before there is a commitment announcement. Well, we said because of how the recency of him going to the portal to that smoke with Arkansas coming out, there just wasn't time for him to get on campus really prior to that week-long dead period. And we've emerged on the other side of the week-long dead period. That ended on Thursday, and his visit began on Monday. So we talked about that yesterday, confirmed once again. I put a tweet out today confirming that the visit's still ongoing. It's still going on. And in that, I said I had a source that I spoke with last night that told me that out and about, Malik Euan during his visit, it's all smiles from what they could see, just a lot of smiles. And you say, well, that's a visit, right? They're happy. Not necessarily. I've had different reports on stuff like that where players were kind of lukewarm and there wasn't a good read on it. Grant Nelson was a perfect example of that, right? Under EPM, Eric Patrick Musselman. And, there was a lot going on in discussions about how to handle that visit and how that visit was going to be approached. And I was in the middle on some of that stuff on the front end on what was going to happen, what the game plan and the strategy was for that visit. And it never felt right. I remember we talked about all of that at that time. Well, let's jump to Euan. It's the opposite. It's all smiles is what I'm hearing. So, if you thought that was just, what does that really mean? It means better than the alternative. I don't know what it means. You interpret. I'm here to help bring some information. So that's part of it. I've got another source telling me, so we confirm the visit's still ongoing, talked about all smiles. Then I've got another source telling me that the presentation, whatever they're doing in whatever order they're doing in terms of his visit, has been out of the park solid, like really fantastic. So that's something else that I'm getting back. So, am I here to tell you that he's going to make his public commitment announcement today? I'm not here to tell you that. I'm here to say it's possible. Keep an eye on it. That's possible. It could be maybe as soon as tomorrow. Now, okay, now I'm getting a different thing on the screen. I was trying to stop that. Someone said, stop flexing. Stop texting teenagers. It's weird and they don't want to talk to you. Well, that's contrary to, thanks for the comment. That's contrary to my experience. In fact, I'm very respectful about the process. I don't blow them up constantly. I ask them how they prefer to be communicated with, whether it's via text, DM on a social media platform, or phone call. I'm very polite about that stuff. When Nate Ament came into town for his visit, I was there because I wanted to interview him. I got to the hotel. I had his itinerary. I wouldn't have had that unless there was some hope I would interview the player. And when I got there, he sought me out. He saw me and walked over to me and said, hey, man, what's up? I hadn't even had a chance yet to let him settle in. I was trying to be very respectful of that. He came over to me. And I said, I had interviewed him before last May. And he was good to do an interview. He was all over it. So what you just posted is contrary to my experience. Now, that doesn't mean that every conversation with every player goes as planned, or that they're available, to talk very much. And that happens. And so you're kind of reading the room and trying to make the right decisions on how to. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Thanks for the comment. I mean, if I've talked to so many recruits over the years, and I've broken more recruiting news than anybody that covers Arkansas Razorbacks basketball. That's a fact. So it works pretty well for me. All right, so we're about 5 minutes in. The Malique Ewin visit, from all accounts, based on what I told you, is going really well. In fact, within the hour when I confirmed that he was actually still on campus and the visit was ongoing, he posted to his Instagram account, I've already got it out on Twitter, a photo of him during his visit, and it's got him in a Razorback uniform on a screen, on a wall-mounted TV screen, probably inside the facility somewhere. So maybe that image is part of the projection, part of what they're showing him and going over what it would look like with him as a Razorback. I thought it was cool. Ewan would be a featured player. I missed some of that comment, but thanks for the comments. I've struggled with it. Maybe I'm doing a little bit better lately trying to read some of them. And I won't weed out if there are some ones. I've just read one that was challenging, so I'm doing my best with that. So things are looking really good. Now, here's the thing. Malik Ewin has announced a Final Five list. That's not unusual. We know sometimes these lists are just fluff, and that some teams aren't in it anymore and never were for the longest period of time, or maybe they were to about a midpoint, or maybe they're in it to win it, and they're truly on the list with maybe an outside shot. You just never know about lists. But there is word that he's got a visit planned after Arkansas to Mississippi State. We know Auburn's been a threat trying to secure big men. So you're keeping it. Maybe Keyshawn Murphy's been one of the names that's out there that maybe Auburn's closing in on. But the thing is, in Calipari's track record at Arkansas so far last year, nobody that made it to campus to visit made it beyond that to another visit in this portal recruiting before committing to Arkansas. So if they were coming to Arkansas and the process was silent commit, paperwork, campus visit, even though we didn't know about Nelly's, it turned out it was the same process, except our knowledge of the visit was later, but it was the same process. There are variations maybe in timing, but it's kind of that chronology. So to me, I'll be surprised that Calipari doesn't get this done and he doesn't take a visit to Mississippi State. However, if he leaves, two things: if he leaves campus and there's not a commitment announcement very soon, and he ends up taking that visit or another visit or whatever might change, then it's one of two things. One is Arkansas, whatever happened, it's become an NIL situation where Arkansas will not exceed evaluation ranks. They're not going to be pinned down in that kind of situation. Are they desperate now? Well, they have ranges on everybody. Are they desperate because they need big men that they might move off of the top of the range? That's something I would have to consider as possible. You threw in a lot of offer when you look at NIL to retain Adou-Thero. Well, he's off to the NBA draft. Nate Ament is still, you're wondering where that's going to land. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. I've got some new thoughts on that. I don't know how new they are, but maybe just another way of looking at it. But, coming back to Ewan, would they maybe get to the top of their range and then exceed it to get it done? That I don't know. But if he goes and visits somewhere else, that probably tells me they didn't. Or Calipari, this will be a change in him in this recruiting cycle versus last, that he says, okay, I think we're good here. You want to go just kick the tires over there? I'm okay with that. He has not operated that way. I would be surprised if that's door number two, but I'll leave it as a possibility. I always try to give you my interpretation of what could happen based on the experience of doing this job, covering this stuff. But so far covering Calipari, it didn't work that way in the first recruiting cycle. Doesn't mean that he couldn't change it and be okay with something like that. Who knows? I will say this, whether you want to call it a process or a policy, he pretty much adhered to it. And the things he told us, I'm only going to get 3 or 4 high school guys. He kept that promise the first recruiting cycle. And so far it's been 3 with an outside chance to get 4 I say outside, waiting on the chance for Nate Ament to see if it goes from chance to reality, and that would move it to 4. So he's kept his word there. He's made a big point about retention. He was able to do that, bringing Kentucky players with him. It looks like Arkansas is going to retain the 4 guys that are still retainable. There was never any loss in terms of Boogie Flan and Adou-Thero based on, we always thought they were going to the draft anyway. You made a push to keep Thero, but that was part of your retention effort. Big Z, Arkansas had a chance to retain him, but the demands for playing time were outside the scope of what Arkansas was willing to do based on what they think needs are to advance the program in year 2. Kudos to them for doing that. That's on them. That's their choice. So they haven't lost anything yet. Jonas Adu and Nellie Davis moved on because they had to. They're out of their eligibility's out. So here we are, and I'll be surprised if Ewan isn't an Arkansas public commit and never makes it to Mississippi State. But I leave out that possibility since he scheduled it. And I think the strongest indicator, if he doesn't commit to Arkansas and takes a visit, is that Arkansas has moved on, whether it's an NIL squeeze or something like that. That's my best guess, with the secondary option. One more time before we move on to other business. For some reason, Calipari relaxed his process. Says, sure, go ahead. We'll get it sewn up after that visit. I don't think that's in the realm of reality, but it's gotten so crazy, this recruiting cycle in the portal. I don't leave anything out. Now, when I was on yesterday to break the news, to break everybody's heart, I wanted to rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get it done in the morning. Let's tell everybody right now, Geron Pierre Jr. is off the table. It's over. Get used to it, because we don't know at what point. I mean, it wasn't until the evening, I think sometime at night, that his commitment announcement to SMU came out, and which surprised a lot of people. We never once told you he was an Arkansas lean. We never once gave odds. Well, it's down to Arkansas on this team. Maybe it's 50-50 or maybe it's 75. We never did that. I even told you there was no paperwork done on him, which made me think, if with the conflicting stuff about whether he was on campus or not, led me to believe, well, first, he's not a silent commit. I couldn't confirm paperwork easily like I was able to do with Ewan and Pringle. So we never got to a place where we were making any predictions. So to find out that it hadn't gone as far as the kid was saying and his camp was saying was a bit of a surprise. But in reality, the fact that he wasn't coming to Arkansas needed to get out there. I got it out before anybody. I had to get it out early. I put it on the message board at HogvilleNET on 2 different forums over there, two different forums on that message board before I even came on here and did that segment. Because I didn't want Hog fans sitting around thinking they're going to get a kid that's just not going to happen. It wasn't even in the realm of reality. So I wanted that. You're welcome, by the way. Let's rip that Band-Aid off and get past it. But when we gave that segment, I also gave you some other updates. Remember previously, I've been saying for a while, Arkansas is going to have as many as 4 visitors in the next 2 weeks, starting with the end of the dead period, which ended last Thursday. The visit times, we know the window began this past weekend. And so the next couple of weeks, you'd have 3 weekends, 2 bookending the middle one for that time frame. Well, I updated yesterday a little bit more intel. Beyond Ewan, this week, even by midweek, Arkansas is expected to have another visitor. Now, I haven't been able to share that. I wasn't able to share that then. I'm not going to, in terms of more details, more specifics on that, other than another visitor this week and maybe as soon as midweek. So it could be on the heels and the end of Malique Ewin. Another thing I told you was in that conversation, because we keep talking about, well, what's the deal with Nick Pringle? The paperwork's done, privately committed. What's up with that? There was a lot of scuttlebutt that he might have done one of those Nellie Davis under the color of night, cloaked, unknown to the public visits before the dead period. Remember, he went in the portal early. His list of contacts came out early, several days before that dead period. And there hadn't been a lot of talk since then. So if it was hush, hush, quiet, which obviously it has been, and Arkansas's in the driver's seat, he could have gotten on campus. There was a lot of talk, people saying, well, we saw him. It happened. It's been confirmed. I even acknowledged that I don't have that 100% confirmed, but it's out there. Maybe that's true. And if it is, maybe he's the first one to pop, because in the process, if he did that, he'd already been on campus. Paperwork's done, silent commit. The next thing's public. We're still waiting on that. But the information I just gave you yesterday was, the last thing I heard was maybe he hasn't been on campus yet. Well, let's go further than that right now. Let's just go a little bit further. I'll tell you that the staff has told me that he hasn't been on campus. So if that's true, why wouldn't it be? Maybe, I mean, they're quiet on all this stuff. But if he hasn't been on campus, maybe he's got one coming up pretty fast. Maybe, right? If he hadn't been on campus. So keep an eye on that. You know, there's not been any list that he's put out similar to Ewan where there's a Final Five and Arkansas's in it, or a Final Three and Arkansas's in it. There was some rumor stuff about some other teams a few days ago that got silenced pretty quick. But you just never know in this wild, wild west and what teams are trying to do. We're not sure yet if either one of these guys. It doesn't seem like it with Ewan, but even with Pringle, if there's some kind of catch and release element, like what played out with two different players last year, that I've overly beaten that dead horse, only because I know how fans are. You hear silent commit, you hear paperwork and all that, but it's process versus results, and weird things happen. Arkansas, based on how those scenarios played out, had better landing options than playing those all the way through on a couple of them. The other ones worked out just fine. They were outliers, but outliers matter because it's a precedent. You know that it's happened. Just like when we say a visitor that we don't know about, we're not just making that up. There's a precedent for that. Nellie Davis did it. I mean, it's only smart to go through all the things that could be happening and then tell you what we believe to be true based on good source information. Sometimes you have multiple sources telling you stuff, people that are reporters, the player themselves, their agent, and it's a total smokescreen, and you get led down a path. You know, I mean, we definitely have confirmed from the staff that Arkansas was in on Geron Pierre Jr. and Lamar Wilkerson, but those things didn't carry through and didn't carry it on, despite what one of those players said was, right, in his camp. So, you know, you got to understand, through the process, reporting and what we're delivering to you is good information in that time until it's not. Very rarely, then there are smoke screens and there is misdirection, but very rarely do you have so many people in the media and sports. I mean, Ole Miss did have him on campus. You know, but you can decide for yourself whether he was there or not. The staff says he wasn't, and based on the other scenarios that were coming out with other reporters, whether it was me doing the Arkansas side of it or the ones I was talking with that cover Kentucky and Ole Miss, because Kentucky recruited him for a while, there was a lot of misdirection. As the dust settled, you realize there was a lot of stuff that, you know, maybe wasn't as reliable as you would think coming directly from some of these people that are involved in it. So there's that. But let's not dwell on that anymore. That's the last I speak on that. It's still a little fresh. I didn't come back on to do a segment to say Pierre, you know, broke Ole Miss's heart. I mean, he actually made it to campus and still picked SMU. That tells you right there that, you know, for what we know for sure is that Chris Beard lost out. You can say that. You know, it's debatable, and, you know, I'm going to stick with the staff. If they say he wasn't there, he wasn't there. And so Arkansas didn't lose anything. Now you could say, well, why weren't they on a shooter like that? Why weren't they on the in-state kid Wilkerson? Well, we're back and forth. If it seems more like more and more momentum that DJ Wagner's coming back, which we've talked about, that helps maybe explain that. You know, it's just crowded there. Acuff and Malik Thomas, they didn't sign up to come and sit the bench for a guy that's going to come in and be ball dominant, be a volume kind of, you know, that's not part of the plan. Not to say that if you added someone like that, you couldn't figure out a way to make it work, but maybe Arkansas is trying to figure out more frontline stuff, and we know they need it. That's not to rule out that they couldn't get. Remember what we were talking about? We were making the comparisons and contrasts with Lamar Wilkerson and Geron Pierre Jr. versus a guy, and I kept using. Do we have Malik? I saw something to do with. I saw some notification come up about Malique Ewin, but it went off my screen so fast, I'm not sure what I was getting there. Has anybody heard or seen anything? Okay, I just called up these. Sorry about that. I think it's much ado about nothing there, just his name. Malique Ewin, we'll talk more about Malik. Someone asking about how good is he on defense. I don't think that's where his bread is buttered. So there's that. But we were talking about contrasting and comparing guys like Lamar Wilkerson and Geron Pierre Jr. We've done this before. Let's do it again. And a guy like, I use Duke Miles as an example out of OU. You're sick of me saying it, right? I think he's back in the portal after committing to Virginia. But under 10 points per game, a really highly efficient shooter everywhere, 51%, 6'2" guard, 51% from the field, 80 plus at the free throw line, but from three on moderate volume, over 43%. Well, there's a guy that wouldn't necessarily, he's been in a role at the high major level where he's not the go-to guy and a ball dominant guy, but he picks his spots and he's a reliable, dependable kind of guy. Well, there's another name that Arkansas's reached out to. We just found out about. And now Adam Miller, a 6'3" guard, Duke Miles, 6'2", 6'3" guard. He's been 4 years in college already. He started out at Illinois, then he was at LSU for a year, then the last 2 years at Arizona State. But when you look at his career, a 10-point score on his career. Last year at Arizona State, 9.8 points per game. Size-wise, that kind of role-wise, he's not the major guy in your offense, maybe a third or fourth option, and could be maybe someone, but Arkansas is contacting him. That was reporting that came out from 24/7 Sports yesterday or last night. So that's a guy that would maybe not be the alpha type like Wilkerson and Pierre that maybe would fit there, so that you can't completely rule out still maybe Arkansas is kicking the tires on some backcourt help to help you shoot from three. The whole thing with Miller is 10-point career average. And if you look at his first 3 seasons, Illinois, LSU, and then in year 1 at Arizona State, he was between a low 30s to mid 30s 3-point shooter. But this past year at Arizona State, his volume of threes attempts went down to about 4.4 per game. Those are the attempts, and that's a career low. But his career high is his percentage from three, mid to low 30s, his first 3 years, all the way up to 43%. So here's a guy that as he's matured and stayed in college, maybe is the kind of guy you look at and say, hey, we can make that translate here, and we don't have to promise him, a big role. Maybe. I don't know what he's looking for when he goes in the portal. A lot of schools have contacted him. It's just one example how he could do it. I think the focus could probably be more on Frontline. Certainly you've got to get two bigs. You have to. You got to. You can't just stop at one. If it's Ewan, looks like it's going to be. Pringle, I still think that's on pace to be a Razorback. Again, remember catch and release, things that have happened in the past. Keep an eye on it. So I think those two. But I mentioned yesterday when we came on, Ugonna Onyenso, who played for Cal for 2 years at Kentucky, transferred when he came to Arkansas and went to Kansas State, played fewer minutes, had less of a role, but at Kentucky, over 18 minutes a game and nearly 3 blocked shots per game. His rim protection is outstanding. 7-footer. I mentioned because as I remembered, he was a frail guy for the most part, but he added some weight in year 2 at Kentucky. When I went back and looked at it, they listed him at Kansas State at 247. And in the picture, his face looked more filled out. So maybe he's gotten stronger. Nonetheless, it didn't change him statistically. It didn't increase his role while he's there. But I was told to keep an eye on that one. And I mentioned, could Arkansas be looking to go 3 deep and just make sure they've got enough bodies there, plus having Trevor Brazile that's your main starting 4, but can help at the 5. Now you would have some real depth. Certainly if you have injuries on that front line like we saw Arkansas last year, and you've got some versatility and options. Let's say that you've got Ewan, who's mostly an offensive guy. Let's say you get Pringle, your physical guy, and let's say you add a guy that knows he's going to have a backup bench role and be, help you somehow in the rotation, and a guy like Onyenso. Well, and let's say one of the 2 main guys that you recruited there, Ewan and Pringle, are down for a game or 2, or whatever, or some combination. I like the combination of one guy's a rim protector, one guy's more physical, and the other guy's more of an offensive guy, which is Ewan. Pringle, the physical guy. Ewan's blocking just under a shot per game. I mentioned the other day he had 9 double-doubles this last year for Florida State, and 5 of those were in a consecutive game stretch during ACC play. And not only was he getting double-doubles, but several of those games he got multiple block shots, and a couple of more he had at least one. So there's some idea that you won't get 0 rim protection from him. Pringle was a better shot blocker. That's not really his game. His numbers were a little better at Alabama than they were last year at South Carolina. When you just look at the rim protection part of it, it's still not what he does. But an Onyenso is a guy that would definitely check that box and give you lineup versatility, matchup versatility in game, even if he's not starting. So those are the things to just keep an eye on. What are some big names that are still out there? Jameer Watkins, we've talked so much about him out of Florida State. The previous staff recruiting, we know that. In the portal, how cool would it be if he was going to visit on the heels of Malik Ewin and be part of this up to 4 players in the next 2 weeks, part of it, you know? So there's another guy. I mean, 6'7" could be that 3-4 kind of guy, you know, a volume kind of guy. Now that gets interesting if you go that route, because we really believe Trevor Brazil's coming back to be a main role player at the 4 and your starter. But he will play some at the 5 likely, especially if you don't go 3 deep at center and you keep that to 2. So how would you make that work? Jameer Watkins, is he going to take minutes away from Carter Knox at the 3? Or Billy Richmond helps back up the 3? I mean, again, you got to look at this. And we got to come back to the fact you're still waiting on commitment news. You believe that things are just, all these teams are getting players in Arkansas Hidden. A lot of these teams are having to replace a lot. They'd love to be in the retention spot Arkansas's in right now. It's not just retention, it's retention of guys that know the feeling of advancing to the second week of the NCAA tournament. Players you're bringing back that aren't just viewed as role players. Or Carter Knox, I've said, he's got potential to be all SEC. If Brazil plays the way he did the last 9 games consistently, he'll be all SEC. I don't rule out a guy like Billy Richmond III being like an all defensive team. I can't rule that out for a DJ Wagner. That was part of his strength last year, was his good size at 6'3", 6'4", strong, downhill finisher in offense, and it could be a tough defender. And he there were times he was spotty on defense, but a lot of college players are. But there's a lot of hope in what Arkansas is bringing back. The identified problems are perimeter shooting, and that's why you get disappointed when you hear things like Arkansas didn't go very far with Lamar Wilkerson and apparently Geron Pierre Jr. Okay. And there's still, like I mentioned, some of the possibilities out there. Maybe they feel like look, we got enough in the backcourt. We'll figure that out. Maybe there's someone else that's going to bring that. Nate Ament would potentially bring that. If nothing else, despite being not strong enough that people talk about as maybe something that's glaring to rely on somebody that much if you're still in those sweepstakes, and we'll talk about it, he can certainly knock down shots. Big time 3-point shooter. And so, you know, if you end up getting him, that would help. But let's talk about that for a little bit. 27 minutes in, by the way. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. We appreciate you. We're getting into the week where I think we're going to hear some things. I'm interested to see, are we going to hear anything publicly about players coming back to Arkansas? Will they put something out, the players? We're still on that watch. I think I said this, I think the last time we were on, the last couple of times, I believe you're going to hear anywhere from 1 to 3 names by the end of this coming weekend that have committed to Arkansas, anywhere from 1 to 3. So I'm still there. I still think that's likely, that somewhere in that range. So if it's only 1, that I'm covered. You know, things happen. Things draw out even further, sometimes longer than we think it will. But a Nate Ament said his decision process was a week or 2 weeks, and I'm not ruling out that he could be one of those. It seems like it's probably Duke based on the smoke, but I'm telling you, the Arkansas Sading and the Arkansas NIL offer is so strong. And, you know, I want to repeat something, because the more I talk to folks, he said he was delaying it beyond April 1st, going to keep an eye on further developments. And then repeated again in an interview with Kristen Peak over the weekend at the Nike Hoop Summit, sit-down interview that was on video. He repeated again, you know, kind of keeping an eye on the portal, stuff like that. So the idea is, you know, the scuttlebutt was, well, he's keeping an eye on players coming and going from the teams that he might want to play for, and he's down to a Final 5. You know, depends on who you listen to. It's down to Arkansas and Duke. Some people think it's Tennessee and Duke. Kentucky's done what they're going to do. We've been saying it for a while that they feel like they're out of it. And you look at their portal moves. If you're really watching portal moves, they're pretty much filled up right now. In fact, once they get Lamar Wilkerson, who I think will probably, it's down to Indiana and Kentucky. I guess Indiana's still pursuing, but if it's Kentucky, we'll probably hear the announcement within in the next couple of days, probably. And that pretty much takes them out just mathematically when you look at roster and other things of the Nate Ament sweepstakes, but they don't feel like they're in it anyway. So I'm just kind of recovering some things on the teams in the Final 5. But I don't think he's just watching portal moves from the standpoint of, you know, what are they doing and how does that impact me playing time wise? He's also looking at portal moves, in my opinion, based on the people I'm talking with that feel connected to this, everywhere to see where that can help him with NIL. What team, the longer he draws this out, based on how, I mean, you look at Arkansas and Duke, for example, there really hasn't been any portal news in terms of addition. So that leaves open that NIL for him to capitalize on, maybe maximizing that. Maybe there's still an opportunity to pit some teams that, on a paper anyway, appearances wise, look, well, you haven't made any portal moves. You got that NIL money. Let's get it to where I need it. I mean, those are, that's some of the thought process on the portal part of it for him and his camp and his agent, and keeping an eye on things. So it's not just about the opportunity with playing time and role. That's part of it. But it's also, how do we maximize the NIL? One person, I mentioned this before, thought that the waiting game might backfire on him because teams are going ahead and moving on, and that maybe that at the end of the day, some of these schools are also waiting on this, this House bill to get passed, which will give the schools, some schools feel like that will give them leverage on some of this Wild West, some of these Wild West dollar figures. So, but both sides are gambling and risking a little bit the longer you wait on things. Could Arkansas have closed on a Keyshawn Hall or somebody like that? Probably, but I trust what Calipari's doing because he always lands with solid personnel. That's typically true from 1 through 5. The big question mark I have is, it doesn't appear to me what through retention and other things that we've seen so far, or we hear so far, as really having traction, doesn't seem like 3-point shooting is really being addressed. Well, Ament would help be part of that. I personally still think Arkansas could look to a backcourt piece. And so we talk about, well, maybe the most attention should be on Frontline and a 3-4 guy, maybe a Jameer Watkins. I gave some examples of guys that aren't really Lamar Wilkerson and Geron Pierre in terms of volume and what their roles would be as alpha type scorer shooters, and maybe guys that have been in the high major level for a while. They've got that experience, and they're 3rd and 4th options anyway. They have been that, so they're not having that expectation of jamming up your playing time and production for others. Maybe there's a path to add something to both, somewhere Frontline 3-4 combo to maybe a true 4, maybe even a guy like Onyenso that would be a 3rd big, and maybe a mid-tier type of shooter guy. Not that his percentage are that way, but again, you look at the numbers through a career, you understand bringing them in. Maybe they're just really there to help you be that kind of guy, kind of like a hired gun. And they'll be in there somewhere, and you've expanded. Not only have you expanded from 9 to 11, but maybe you expand from 9 to 12, thinking Isaiah Sealy and Kareem Artal may be more developmental. You don't want to count on them going in, being able to help you necessarily for long stretches, but you've got them. But based on attrition, you might need them. But you've expanded from a true 9 deep to a 10, and try to figure it out from there. I mean, there's more than one way to do it. We don't have enough of those answers yet. We don't even have public answers on Euan and Pringle. We're waiting on those, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. We're 33 minutes in. I don't have a whole lot more here. That I wanted to walk back through some of that stuff. We've peeled back on some of that, but until we get more to talk about in terms of what's really going on, we know some of it. Sounds like the Malique Ewin visit's going great. Nate Ament would be the jewel of Cal's recruiting class. Well, he's the highest rated player. I personally think Darius Acuff Jr. Has a strong case for that, whether they get Ament or not. And Malik Thomas is not far from that. I mean, you're talking about, if you got Nate Ament, you're talking about 3 top 10 rated 5-star guys. You can make a case for any of the 3. And why? I mean, right now, Malik Thomas looks like the only true 2 that Arkansas is going to have, because the guys they can retain, DJ Wagner is a combo, I guess. He really didn't play his best basketball until Boogie got hurt, and he was your primary ball handler. He didn't look too comfortable to me, awkwardly kind of being that 2 guard with Boogie playing mostly on the ball. You had Nelly at the 3. And you had Carter Knox at that part of the year. We're still true freshmen, kind of clumsily figuring things out at times. It was clunky. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be a little smoother going forward, but you really haven't addressed improving your three-point shooting. And Malik Thomas may be the guy they feel like is going to help there. 38% on 8.4 attempts at overtime elite. So that's high volume at that level and a really good percentage. It's not 40 plus, but 38.2 is really good when you're taking that many. Will it translate to the high major level? And if it does, is it a Carter Knox type of transition where you don't see it for a while and you're midway through the season, you've started 0-3 in SEC play and you're like, what the hell's going on again? You always want to see your team finish stronger than they started. Calipari did that, and everybody got better. Man, you got to be excited. I know you haven't heard any portal news yet. We've always said, too, at the end of the day, you got to get the two big men. That's a huge need, so we don't want to slough that off and act like it's not important. But at the end of the day, you're probably 3 guys out of the portal, maybe 4. Most of it was retention in that high school class, and you're really in great shape there. And then Ament might, let's say that you got the 2 big men in Ament. That means, excuse me, that means you got 2 portal guys again this year. Yes, technically the Kentucky transfers counted as portal, but that was really roster retention. We've talked about that. Your 2 true portal guys were Jonas Adu and Ellie Davis. You might end up with 2 again. And all this fuss and worry and strain over that. So, where it landed with really good players like it did last year, like it always does under Calipari. What are we worried about? And it's great news. If you wanted news, Ewan's on campus. He still was on campus when I came on it, before noon today. Still there. It's going great. Did I say Ament? I meant Ewan, Malique Ewin. We know he's on his visit. I thought Ament, someone commented, he didn't have a good game in the Nike Hoop Summit. I thought he did really good things. I had him ranked as one of my top 7 or 8 players in the McDonald's game. He only scored 10 points, but he was efficient. He knocked down both of his threes. They were beautiful. I mean, just the stroke is incredible. And as that game went on, he figured out how to get his drive game working and get closer to the basket, maneuvering with a lot of good craft. So the stronger he gets, the more he's not going to bounce off contact. The harder it's going to be to wall him off. And if you do wall him off because he's 6'9" or 6'10", the stronger he gets, the more he's going to be able to take the brunt of that, not get off balance, and just rise over people and finish. Come on, man. Let's start connecting dots. I remember when I started covering Jalen Williams in Fort Smith Northside High School, and, there were a lot of people that were just not giving him the full credit of what he was going to be, including some of the best high school coaches in the state that were state title winners. They saw the tweets I was putting out and the projections I was making for Jalen Williams. And some of them challenged me on that. I'm like, I don't know what you see. I can't see that. They were flabbergasted. So now Nate Ament's a one and done, right? We don't have a couple of years to see that progress. Like by the time, within 18 months of some of the stuff I was saying on Jalen Williams, anywhere from a year to 18 months, eyes started really open. You're not going to have that much time with Nate Ament. He'll get stronger. They'll have him on a summer program if he came wherever he goes. He's going to add some weight, but it looks like there's a ways to go. And we've always told you the positives, and always going back to May when I put eyes on him out in the Adidas event down in Texas, he's got to get stronger. The one thing is the further he tries to get beyond that free throw line extended attacking the basket is where it's not easiest for him because of that. So how much of that can he really improve on for a freshman season? The skill stuff is there. The length and size is there to give you some versatility in your lineup. And it should give you an opportunity to improve where you were last year as a 3-point shooting team. There's no guarantees of that, but that's his superpower is that shot, among other things that are really good. So, that's where I am with Nate Ament. I can't tell what that says. Some of these some people, it's so weird because I see division with DJ Wagner. A lot of people that wished he'd moved on. A lot of people that, man, we need him. I'm in the camp that retention should rule and reign, and you figure the rest out. And based on how he helped Arkansas last year for a team that ended up being a really good team and should have been an Elite Eight team, get him back. But that doesn't mean that it gives you a pass to not check improve in areas that were glaring. And I thought 3-point shooting was one of them. So somehow you've got to figure that out. Maybe they've got a plan that we can't see right now to do that. So it's never just one easy answer on some of this stuff. I've seen division on Nate Ament. I'd rather have more veteran guys that are stronger and proven at the college level. Okay, that's part of what Calipari acknowledged he has to do moving forward when he left Kentucky. Only going to take 3 or 4. Well, if he took Ament and got Ament, let's put it that way, then he didn't go off. He didn't go, he didn't, contradict his word. But at the same time, and you're looking at team needs and what might be best, you could say, well, maybe he didn't, break his word, but at the same time, maybe Arkansas would have been better with a more veteran guy, even if he wasn't quite efficiency-wise comparable to Ament shooting from 3. Maybe some of the other stuff that would be helpful to Arkansas, and you don't have to worry about lack of strength in year one and how you might have to deal with that. How many games in college will look like the Nike Hoop Summit the other night? We don't know that that's not an outlier for what it'll be like, but it might not be. So we just don't know that. We haven't seen enough when you look at some of these events, because I see more of these kids that we talk about than anybody that covers Arkansas recruiting. I'm in the trenches. I'm out there. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying as someone who does that, I can't deliver any promises because I understand when you move from the high school level, no matter how good you are, it doesn't always translate right away to the next level. So as much as I put my eyes on them, I can't deliver any promises there. I just know what the promise of the player is in terms of at some point it should hit. And even then it might not. We see busts all the time. That's part of it. Calipari doesn't have a perfect track record with 5 stars. He just has the best, not just getting them in big amounts, but what they do later. So, he's selling that too. He's selling that. We need an experienced guard. DJ fits that bill. Of course he does. That's the thing. He's got experience. He'll be a 3rd-year college player in a system that works. Everybody wants to talk about the postseason at Kentucky. DJ's freshman season, he helped a team finish 2nd in what was a really good SEC. No, it wasn't as good as it was this year, but it was really good. And they finished 2nd behind Tennessee, a game out. Had a great season, big wins. He was part of that. Yeah, he was hurt. It didn't play out like you would hope for a 5-star ranked top 10, and some of his backcourt mates were lottery picks. No one's calling him a lottery pick, but now he's a veteran college guard. He can improve on some of his issues. I don't know how much he can improve on 3-point shooting. I have concerns there, but I said I can't rule out that maybe he could raise it from 30 on a career so far in 2 years to 34, 35%. That seems like a stretch. Maybe he can get it to 32 or 33. I don't know that moves the needle enough. What he could do is figure out and watch film on his poor ball protection and taking care of the basketball and iron that out. That's something within his control. That's not about shooting. That's about being locked in and not having those lapses. That would help Arkansas a lot. And it'll certainly help if your veteran guard is taking care of the basketball, because it puts pressure on guys like Acuff and anybody else, like a Billy Richmond, who also had turnover problems, to clean that shit up and get better there too, because that's what's expected. So yeah, there's more than one way to look at it and see DJ as a big positive because of some of the other stuff. He's one of the best downhill finishers for a guy who I think 6'3" and under. They list him at 6'4". Maybe I think he's probably 6'3". He's strong. He's not an explosive above the rim guy necessarily, not in most of his finishes, but man, he gets to really good angles and does a good job with that. And so, that's a skill. And that's when you're talking about basketball, what do we talk about? If you're not knocking down threes, the preference is getting to the rim and maybe drawing free throws if you don't get a close range shot. And he's good at that. He's got little floaters and runners. He's connected to Cal. That family's been part of him for years and years beyond just his recruitment to get him in college. The recruitment's really been a lifetime. So those are bonds and things. There's connectivity with what the coach wants, and those types of things that can go a long way to your cohesion. And it can work both ways, I guess. But in a sense, it seems to me like there's probably some positives out of that. So, we can look at that in different ways. The negative might be, well, if you could get better at that position, that bond may hurt you. Well, but again, we keep talking about retention and continuity on rosters. And when you look at the Final Four and Elite Eight teams, they're mostly examples of that. They're not all identical in how it got done, but they're mostly examples of how that was important. So you can look at it more than one way and feel good, really good about a guy like DJ coming back. All right, I know I promised to get off 45 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm signing off. I'm Kevin McPherson. Please remember to hit like, subscribe, share, turn the notifications on. Turn those machines back on. Trading Places reference. I did one the other day, right? We did a Feeling Good, Looking Good, Lewis, one of those. I'm old. Young people, go check out Trading Places. It's a great comedy. Man, Brazil. Someone just mentioned Brazil's name before I sign off. He looked like the Brazil that we were promised, or that was advertised coming in. And the one that when he went down with injury, what did EPM say? Eric Patrick Melsman said, that's a top 5 guy in the SEC. He comes back from injury. He's looked anything but. He hadn't looked top 50. And that's just being honest. And what did he look like? He looked like one of the most versatile, just a problem to deal with, a matchup nightmare in the last 9 games when the opportunity fully presented itself. He took the reins. He didn't whimper and curl his tail between his legs and get in the fetal position. No, he grabbed the reins and kicked ass, man. If that's the guy you're getting, I mean, the retention part of it is recruiting too. The portal splash here is the guys not going in and you keep them. How about that for a portal non-splash? And diving, the guy that goes in, the teams that go in and don't make a splash, they're the winner. Look at it that way. So you don't want Brazil to go in the portal. You don't want to lose the guys that helped you have the success that you had last year. Don't tell me about the 14 losses. I know Arkansas was dealing with injuries. They were dealing with injuries. The 2 best players they brought in, the 2 players they brought in the portal were presumably their 2 top guys, because they were proven all league guys that had been deep in the tournament. On top of that, when you looked at NCAA, Nelly Davis and Jonas Sadu, they both were dealing with injuries. So there's all kinds of stuff that was playing into that. And then Arkansas had to deal with the guys that ended up being their leading scorers and their top production guys, Adu Thero and Boogie Fland. We had to deal with their injuries and being missing in action for long stretches. And they still overcame that. So the guys that you still have on board to retain, they did heavy lifting. They did heavy lifting on a team that was much better than the 14 losses tells you. That was an Elite 8 team. Not technically, but it should have been. They got to iron out. They got to figure out a way to fix some of the self-inflicted wounds we described. They got to get better from 3. I think they're addressing the physicality, the lack of that with a guy like Pringle. And so guys like Carter Knox, who is a physical wing and really learned how to use that physicality to his advantage and not use it and not become a disadvantage. He got better and better. So everything with their retention, some of this stuff now and what their moves in the portal are addressing some of it. Let's see if they address all of it. All right, I really am signing off. If we need to come on with something breaking again, a commitment announcement, the visit news. The visit news could get leaked out because it could happen as soon as tomorrow, a new visitor, second visitor. I've told you at least 2 this week and maybe by the second one by midweek. Well, tomorrow's hump day. Until next time, thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves. Be good. And we'll see you then.